If you thought that the containment policy that the United States has toward China has dialed back or has been reduced in any way, or maybe there's been a change of heart given recent diplomatic ventures or faux diplomatic ventures, as I like to call them, by the United States toward China, you would be mistaken. The United States is very much committed to building up toward war with China. It just so happens that it is bogged down in so many other places that its capabilities are restrained at the moment. Restrained in Ukraine because of the absolute nightmare that has been the Russian special military operation, which has absolutely demilitarized not just Ukraine, but also all of NATO. Then, of course, there is the quagmire now brewing in the Middle East in response to Israel's onslaught on Gaza, which has actually inflamed and absolutely inflamed and a regional war that now includes Yemen, Iraq, and Hezbollah and Lebanon, and on and on and on. But the United States and its war think tanks are preparing for war with China, and they're trying to tell themselves sweet nothings to convince themselves that they can win such a war. I've talked about the numerous war simulations that the United States has, that their think tanks have come up with in order to say the United States can win a war with China over Taiwan. Well, here is another iteration of this. China doesn't have the military power to successfully invade Taiwan, the majority of 52 U.S. experts said in a survey. A think tank surveyed 52 U.S. experts on whether they thought China could successfully invade Taiwan. Only 27% said they thought Beijing could pull off a successful and more amphibious assault. Their belief that the U.S. would intervene in an invasion may have led to their answer. So there you go. Lots of confidence in the U.S.'s military prowess here. So who was this survey by? It was by the Center for Strategic and International Studies, which gathered opinions from U.S. experts, 52 of them in November or December of 2023. And only 27% of them said they strongly or somewhat agree that the People's Liberation Army might be able to pull off an amphibious invasion. A deciding factor for many of these experts could have been the belief that the U.S. would militarily intervene in the event of an attack. An overwhelming 96% of U.S. experts were completely or moderately confident that if China invades Taiwan in the next 5 years, the U.S. military would intervene to defend Taiwan. So lots of faith here, and I'll just show you that this study actually does come from, the CSIS, the Center for Strategic International Studies, surveying the experts' U.S. and Taiwan views on China's approach to Taiwan. So you can get the full report there if you want to torture yourself. But I wanted to show you that this organization, this organization, CSIS, here are their donors. Do you want to see who their donors are? So they have many different donors. Corporate donors, foundation donors, U.S. allied and partner government donors. Who's giving $250,000 and up to the CSIS? The government of the United States, Japan, Republic of Korea, in the UAE, and of course, Taiwan. So you have basically a slush fund here. And then, of course, with corporate donors, who's funding this organization? Well, you have the biggest banks and the oil companies. And look, Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman. You have Bank of America, Chevron. Essentially, what CSIS is then is a mouthpiece of the war makers, the war profiteers, not really the war strategists, as Andrei Martyanov would say. But nonetheless, the United States is looking into, they're asking their so-called experts, can the U.S. win? And indeed, these experts from this think tank, from the hirelings essentially of the U.S. military-industrial complex, says yes. They all say yes, they can win. Well, perhaps it's because they're listening to absolutely ridiculous stories. This came out in mid-January, a rumor that Xi Jinping is in battle with China's own military, and the outcome could drag the U.S. into World War III. This was reported in Business Insider and also the New York Post. But this story circulated as if it had any basis in fact. Many of the reports across the Western mainstream media, they just repeat themselves, they share each other's stories, were repeating a interesting rumor that Xi Jinping is in a struggle with China's military, purging senior commanders to reshape it. He wants the generals ready and willing to go to war, said analysts. A Chinese invasion somewhere like Taiwan could drag the U.S. into a third world war. So they're thinking about war. They're thinking the U.S. could be dragged into a war. And they're saying that Xi Jinping is fighting with China's own military, seeking to purge commanders he sees as unwilling or unable to go to war, military analysts told Business Insider. So what's interesting about this is you're about to find out who these analysts are. And the principal one, the top cited one, should be of interest. It is none other than Gordon Chang, a senior fellow at Gatestone Institute and author of China is Going to War. Xi Jinping, he says, is trying to gain control of the military, and I think he is thinking that he needs officers who are prepared to actually fight. So here we have a rumor circulating. Why would U.S. experts believe they can defeat China or the United States military can defeat China? Well, because they have so-called experts telling them that Xi Jinping is struggling with his own military to prepare for a war that they're not ready for. But Gordon Chang, that's an interesting individual. You may remember him from his hundreds of Fox News appearances, or you may remember him for his famous book, The Coming Collapse of China, a collapse which never came to fruition. Gordon Chang is nothing if not a fraud. But this fraud comes from the Gatestone Institute, they said. And so what is the Gatestone Institute? Well, it's this very shady, another think tank, a so-called International Policy Council that right now is very caught up in what's happening in Gaza and with Iran. It's a consortium of essentially faux journalists peddling war. But who leads this organization? The Gatestone Institute is a nonpartisan, not-for-profit international policy council and think tank dedicated to educating the public about what the mainstream media fails to promote. Institutions of democracy and the rule of law, human rights, they say, a free and strong economy, energy independence, a military capable of peace at home and in the free world, ensuring the public stays informed of threats to our individual liberty, sovereignty, and free speech. So that is what they claim to be doing. But I want to show you who leads this organization. So the Gatestone Institute, while it's almost impossible to find the funders, we can just look at who heads it. The founder and the president is Nina Rosenwald. She's a lifelong defender of American principles of liberty, freedom of speech, and peace through strength. Her work supports the rights of religious minorities, she says, pro-democratic institutions, and women around the world. She serves on the board of, look at these organizations: Human Rights in China, Middle East Forum, the Committee for Accuracy in Middle East Reporting, the National Committee of American Foreign Policy, and the Institute for National Security Studies. But this is the kicker. Look at this one. While all of those institutions are no doubt conduits of the National Endowment for Democracy or some astroturfed U.S. government funding source, this is the kicker. She's a member of the Council on Foreign Relations, basically the CIA's principal think tank, a founding member of the Board of Regents for the Center for Security Policy, and a former member of the National Board of the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, more famously known as AIPAC. So the Gatestone Institute is essentially founded by one of the most ardent members, leaders of AIPAC, former members, and a stalwart, a veteran of the CIA's principal think tank, the Council on Foreign Relations. So how true and credible could these predictions be? The United States essentially is blowing its own whistle. It is telling itself sweet nothings that it can defeat China. But this only shows that they have real intentions of going to war with China and that they are mobilizing their thought leaders, which really is all the United States has at this point, given it doesn't really have the capabilities to strike at China, to isolate China, to contain China as they claim. So they're using these thought leaders to convince us that they can go to war. But the money, if you follow it, it always goes back to the same sources. It goes back to the Council on Foreign Relations. It goes back to the US government. It goes back to the military industrial complex. That is who is peddling this, because they're trying to sell you war. They're not trying to sell a winnable war. That is not the point here at all. And here was China's reactions to all of this. The US keeps hyping military tension around the Taiwan Straits. Washington, secessionists, the real troublemakers to undermine peace, according to experts. So China has just come off the heels, and Taiwan has just come off the heels of this recent election on the province of Taiwan, which reelected the Democratic Progressive Party, which is a secessionist party. And it is my estimation that the United States now feels very confident in its future of building up. It will take years, perhaps, to do this, or not, but it will take quite a while for the U.S. to even be in the position where it can wage such a war. But they are preparing the foundations now. So according to Global Times, the Chinese media, a U.S. think tank released a report on Tuesday claiming the majority of experts from the U.S. and the island of Taiwan said they believe a crisis in the Taiwan Straits is likely in 2024, with a blockade or quarantine of the island by the Chinese mainland seen as the most likely scenario, while analysts from the mainland said this is an old trick of the U.S. to hype regional tensions to spread fear in the region to serve its hegemonic interests. So this is from the Center for Strategic International Studies, as I said, which covered the 87 experts and from the U.S. and the island of Taiwan on cross-strait relations, that these experts say that China has the capabilities to execute a law enforcement-led quarantine or a People's Liberation Army-led blockade of Taiwan, but fewer believed a forceful invasion was possible. Aside from the CSIS survey, the U.S. has taken concrete actions to add tensions to the region. After the Taiwan regional election, which concluded on January 13th, there have not been military tensions around the region so far, but the U.S. is planning on sending a bipartisan congressional delegation to encourage secessionists on the island. And U.S. aircraft carriers are also approaching the region, according to the U.S. Naval Institute. So there you have it. The United States is indeed preparing for a conflict. These war makers, these war profiteers, they would love to see a scenario similar to Ukraine, because it would lead to an endless boondoggle and essentially the opportunity of all opportunities to get their war chest financed indefinitely. That is what Taiwan has served as. It hasn't really served as an unsinkable aircraft carrier. There's nothing on Taiwan that could stand up to the People's Liberation Army. That's fantasy. But there are a lot of weapons that have been dumped onto the island, and they're in the tune of more than 10 to 20 billion US dollars, depending on what's backlogged and what is not. So these expose a hard fact. When accusing China of creating tensions in the region, Washington and secessionists on the island are the real troublemakers, taking concrete actions to undermine regional peace and stability, said the analyst, stressing the U.S. and its puppet on the island should not underestimate the determination and strength of Chinese military forces. Li Haidong, a professor at the China's Foreign Affairs University, told the Global Times on Tuesday that the U.S. needs tensions and fears among the regions to force its allies to stand closer with it and push other countries to take sides and rely on the U.S. This kind of trick has already ruined peace in Europe due to the outbreak of the Ukraine crisis, and Washington wants to copy this in Asia. The Taiwan Straits is its target. So according to this survey, 68% of U.S. experts said a Taiwan Straits crisis was likely or very likely in 2024, compared to 58% of those experts on Taiwan. So there are increasing intimations, indications, and I believe predictions based on a will and a desire, not simply that this is some kind of hypothesis that is based in fact. This is all driven by the United States. It's the United States that's about to send this bipartisan delegation to Taiwan as almost a signal that it believes, or in at least symbolically, that Taiwan is an independent country, which neither international law nor US law even recognizes. But nonetheless, the United States is going to do it anyway. Why? Because, as I said, this war is actually coming. I don't say that to scare. I say that to just not just to warn. I say that as a verifiable fact. Lee said the U.S. is trying to hype an intensifying atmosphere around China to make regional countries believe China is going to take a massive action that will heavily impact everyone. However, China has not done anything yet, and even if China takes action, it will have been provoked by the U.S. military activities and Washington's politicians' encouragement of Taiwan's secessionist authorities. This is the truth that we need to let the world understand quickly. The root cause of the tension around the Taiwan Straits is U.S. interference in China's domestic affairs. And without meddling from the U.S., the Taiwan question, the powder keg the U.S. set in front of China, would have long been diffused in decades past, whether militarily or peacefully. China will shake off this time bomb sooner or later. On Monday, the news website of the U.S. Naval Institute reported that the USS Theodore aircraft carrier is now in the 7th Fleet area of operations as of last weekend. It means there are 3 U.S. aircraft carriers operating in the Asia-Pacific region, the other 2 being the USS Carl Vinson and the USS Ronald Reagan, according to a graphic released by the U.S. Naval Institute News on Monday, which is tracking the U.S. Navy's deployed aircraft carrier strike groups. So this is all exposing the reality. The reality is that the United States is preparing for an open conflict with China. It is sending the aircraft carrier groups. This is something the United States has claimed it is not trying to do. It has claimed that it is not trying to provoke a Cold War with China even. But all of these moves signal something even bigger than that, because if we know anything about history, it's that Cold Wars, the first Cold War, was not simply about just fortifying each side, mutually assured destruction, and with no intention of actual hot conflict. We know from many different examples, from how the United States invaded Vietnam, how it invaded Korea, how also it almost got into nuclear war over the Cuban Missile Crisis, that there was a heavy, intensive offensive posture that the United States wanted to take. And this is no different. In fact, this is probably even more aggressive on the part of the United States, because this new Cold War, the stakes are higher. And I'll tell you why very soon. So these U.S. aircraft carrier deployments show that the U.S.'s strategic focus remains on the Asia-Pacific region, prioritizing major power competition and the Indo-Pacific strategy over conflicts in Europe and the Middle East, said a Chinese military expert and TV commentator, Song Jungping. So this is what's going on. And the PLA is, of course, organizing its combat drills. There's amphibious landing ships joining up with other amphibious assault ships in a multi-course drill. This is par for the course. This is what China has been doing throughout the recent history of the U.S.'s provocations around Taiwan. But the point here is that war is coming, and war is coming in a big way. It's coming in a big way because the United States is pushing this propaganda war once again. It's not in focus necessarily. It's not in vogue. All eyes are on Gaza. More eyes are on Ukraine. But that means that perhaps the opportunity, according to these war hawks, is even greater. And the reason why the United States must do this, why it feels so committed to doing this, is because there is an economic problem with regard to China. And it's not that the China is doing poorly economically, because you can get your share of news about how bad China is doing. I mean, if we just look at, for example, Mr. Paul Krugman, the essentially completely and utterly discredited economist, he wrote an opinion article recently saying China's economy is in serious trouble. But if you read the article, this is what he had to say. He said the U.S. economy is outperforming expectations. Mind you, the U.S. economy in 2023 grew at a paltry 2%. He says that inflation is going down, but that there's no high rates of unemployment, There's no disflation. And so this falling inflation is coming at no visible cost. But he's saying that the story is different in China, and that while China has officially grown at 5.2%, it's underperforming everywhere because, democratic nations like the United States rarely politicize their economic statistics, he says. Although, ask me again if Donald Trump is in office, but authoritarian regimes often do. So there you have it. This is an economist supposedly analyzing economy without any economic analysis that gets in the way. He's not doing that at all. He's just spewing war tropes. So he says it's stumbling seemingly. He said there's deflation and high youth unemployment. It's not a full-blown crisis, but there's reason to believe China is entering a period of stagnation and disappointment. But why is it? It's because Xi Jinping's a bad leader, a poor economic manager, arbitrary interventions, that they're not addressing major issues like population and capacity and aging and stimulus. Now there's a property crisis, on and on and on. That's what Paul Krugman had to say, but that's what you're hearing everywhere, that there is some kind of economic crisis. But this is only hiding the crux of why the United States wants to go to war with China. I believe that the United States is peddling, the U.S. ruling elite is peddling this misinformation about China's economy to buy itself time as it prepares for an actual war with China. Because how do you convince yourself that things are a lot better than they actually are? Well, you tell yourself they are, that you're the one doing well and China is the one doing poorly, that China is the one who's about to collapse. Well, China seems to have a different opinion on this. 5.2%, mind you. I don't remember the last time the United States grew at 5.2% in my lifetime, mind you. Maybe I was too young to remember, but certainly not since the 08-07 economic crisis have I heard of a 5.2% number for an entire year, not a quarter, so to speak. So they have to say the Global Times, which is, I believe the paper of record when it comes to English language Chinese media. CGTN also could be considered a media of record, but Global Times is a newspaper, and it's considered the digestible tabloid of the People's Daily. So China's National Bureau of Statistics on Wednesday released a series of key data on China's economy for 2023. Among them was the attention-grabbing number of year-on-year growth of 5.2%, higher than the target set at the beginning of 2023. The actual trajectory of China's economy stands out from external pessimistic views, criticisms, and even collapse theories, demonstrating robust resilience and potential. According to estimates of the World Bank's predictions for growth rates for major economies in 2023, China's economic increment is approximately 1.5 times that of the United States and around 16.5 times that of the Eurozone. China's contribution to global economic growth is greater than the combined contributions of the Americas, Europe, and Japan, making it a leading engine for economic growth. That sounds a lot different than what the United States is saying, what Paul Krugman is saying. To be frank, the Chinese economy's recovery in 2023 was not entirely smooth. The impact of the pandemic's scar effect on the economy was larger than anticipated, and real estate sector was persistently sluggish. Simultaneously, weak economic recovery exerted pressure on trade growth and spillover effects of actions such as Federal Reserve's interest rates hikes, that's the U.S., and the appreciation of the U.S. dollar shouldn't be underestimated. The public, to varying degrees, have experienced the impacts of these domestic and external challenges in their micro-level perceptions over the last year. There were once even voices of deflation in public opinion, and opportunistic individuals outside even seized the opportunity to chant the collapse of the Chinese economy. Achieving such results in this context is undoubtedly of positive significance. It not only plays a constructive role in allowing both domestic and international observers to gain timely and clear understanding of the overall picture of the Chinese economy, but serves as a refutation of the various unfounded theories and speculations about it. Furthermore, it provides strong encouragement amid a generally lower expectations year for global economic recovery. But it's not just the economic growth, right? Not just the economic growth of GDP. Exports, consumption, and investment are undergoing significant changes in their contribution to economic growth. In 2023, the contribution rate of domestic demand represented by consumption and investment to economic growth reached 111.4% an increase of 25.3 percentage points from the previous 12 months. There's also the problem of insufficient effective demand, and the combination of supply side structural reform and expanding demand needs further strengthening. But here we have investment, right? Accelerating structural adjustment and transformation and upgrading economic development. In 2023, more than 1 trillion yuan on 3 items were invested in electric vehicles, solar panels, and lithium batteries, have been exported, with investments in high-tech manufacturing services growing 9.9% and 11.4% respectively. So this is important. Not only is the economy growing at a 5.2% clip rate, but look at these investments. Manufacturing and services and high tech have grown 9.9, 10%, and 11% respectively. So that is hugely optimistic. That is much better than what Gordon Chang and what all the naysayers in the Western mainstream media, Paul Krugman, the economists, are saying. China is actually growing in key areas that truly do matter in advancing the productive forces of China and that are key to China's future economic development path going in a positive direction. That is really why the United States is at war with China. It isn't that China is collapsing. If China was truly collapsing, then the United States would just sit back. It would act like the meme sometimes you will see across social media where Xi Jinping is just watching the United States collapse, and it's just China is doing nothing in order to facilitate its collapse. That is what the United States would be doing if China were collapsing. Why would the United States need to spend so many resources on militarizing the Asia Pacific, on provoking China around Taiwan, if China were indeed in this moment of decline? But everywhere you'll see it, China is in inevitable decline. It's not going to stop. Foreign Affairs magazine, you can go Bloomberg, everywhere it's China is on the decline. China is in crisis. Yet China grew 5.2% year on year in 2023, one of the most difficult years for the economic situation worldwide. And it's also growing in key areas that are the future of economic growth in general, which is high tech. High tech is the future of economic development in all respects because it is high technology that will be what addresses the problems, the issues, the needs of economies from here on forward, regardless of what we're talking about, whether it's transportation or whether it's housing, no matter what property, all of this, it's high technology that is going to be at the forefront. It's computerized technology, AI technology, all of this is the future. And so China's leading in those areas and growing at a much faster rate than the US and a much faster rate than the Eurozone. So this is why the United States is at war with China. It makes perfect sense. Why would the United States allow this to occur? It's already known that the United States is soon going to be number 2 in GDP terms. The COVID situation, the inflation, worldwide inflation crisis, all of this sluggishness happening in the world economy has slowed down China to a degree. And the Chinese media here, the Global Times, admitted that. But the enthusiasm and the optimism is still there, while the United States has absolutely nothing to show for it. There's no optimism. There's fake optimism. There's Paul Krugman saying that the U.S. is exceeding expectations and never lies about economic statistics, which is foolish if one believes that. You would have to be absolutely naive or really just a moron to believe the United States does not lie about its economic statistics. It lies and it lies and it lies. It creates measures and means tests and all kinds of other things to help cement lies as truth. For example, that the United States has a poverty rate at the number that it does. No, it has a poverty rate much higher because the poverty rate is undercounted. The way that homelessness is counted in the United States always undercounts, because guess how homelessness is counted? It's volunteers going out at one point in time per year and attempting to then estimate how many people are actually sleeping on the streets or in a place that is not their home at any given moment. That is not how you measure anything, but this is how the United States does things. The United States does things by positioning itself as the exceptional one, as the one that can boast about its hubris because it is, in fact, the adversary that is falling. But all of the indications are that the United States is escalating with China around a possible war with Taiwan because it is economically insecure, because it is politically in tatters, and because it is disintegrating as an empire. So the Biden administration is going to put the cherry on top of his absolutely failed and absolutely just discredited rule, 4-year rule, by potentially, if it wasn't enough to have set Ukraine on fire and then set the Middle East on fire once again, well, it seems like the Biden administration is seeking to throw some kerosene on to the Asia Pacific and in particular Taiwan and to ignite that flame as well. But war may be coming, but war is not going to resolve the US's issues. It's certainly not going to resolve Biden's, because the United States can't fight this war right now. They can't. The United States cannot do it. The United States military can't do it. Its Navy can't do it. It is just not going to get done in this way. So right now what you have is essentially a US empire walking on a tightrope at the circus. It is about to fall off that tightrope. It is trying to balance itself on it so that it can continue to pursue its path of war, but not fall to the floor. That is what the United States is doing. At any moment, this could ignite, this could jump off, and it will be the United States to blame for China having to forcefully reunify Taiwan to it because of the absolute aggression, the unlawful methods and measures the U.S. takes around this issue. The U.S. has no right to be here, it has no right to be in that region, has 3 joint communiques claiming it believes in the one China principle. But nonetheless, here you have CSIS, you have think tanks, you have Gordon Chang, and of course, you have the U.S. military proper preparing for a war that it cannot win. I guess all we can say is good luck, but also we need to be ready to oppose this at any cost, because things are about to get hairy when you have at the helm a U.S. ruling elite so desperate it's pumping out someone like Joe Biden to lead, promote, and organize unwinnable wars. And not just unwinnable wars, but catastrophic, world cataclysmic wars that could potentially eliminate the human race from the planet as we know it. That is the stakes. Those are the stakes. China's rise is inevitable. It's not going to stop. There's no hesitation. There's no fear from the Chinese side. The U.S. is the one that should be very afraid of what it is doing. And it will be up to us to continue to observe these developments. And it remains to be seen whether we can muster the opposition to stop it. But stop it, we must. Thank you for tuning in to my latest video. I appreciate all of your support. This channel, however, needs your help. I am seeking to make this channel more sustainable in the long term and upgrade necessary equipment to ensure that this work continues onward and makes progress to give you all of the geopolitical analysis that you all deserve. For that reason, I'm asking you to become a member of my Patreon community at patreon.com/DannyDhaiphong. You can find that link in the video description or in the pinned comment below. For whatever amount you choose to give, just know you are supporting independent media that you can't find anywhere else. Thank you so much, and I look forward to the next video.